He had been planning it for 8 months. She found out on a Tuesday, the same day she signed the papers that made her company worth $4 billion. Her name was Celeste Harmon Vaught, 37 years old, founder and CEO of Vaught Analytics, the data intelligence firm that had quietly reshaped how the federal government tracked financial crimes across 22 countries. She was not famous the way celebrities are famous. She was famous the way certain weapons are famous. People who knew. Everyone else just felt the effects. She had met Brandon Vaught at a conference in Boston 9 years ago. He was charming in the particular way of men who have studied charm rather than possessed it. Attentive, patient. The kind of man who remembered how you took your coffee and used that information like a small, daily currency. She had been 31 and working 18-hour days, and she had mistaken his steadiness for depth. They married in 14 months. He moved into her brownstone in Georgetown. He left his job in marketing consulting 3 years later, citing burnout, and she had believed him because she was too busy building something extraordinary to look closely at the man standing in her kitchen every morning. What Brandon had always wanted was simpler than love. He wanted the money, the name, the access, the invitations to rooms she'd spent a decade earning the right to enter. He had studied Celeste the way certain people study maps, not to appreciate the territory but to find the fastest route through it. The plan began, according to what investigators would later reconstruct, in February. Brandon had made contact with a woman named Sylvia Crane, former pharmaceutical sales rep, currently managing a private membership club in DuPont Circle that laundered money through a catering license. They had met at a fundraiser. By March, they were meeting twice a week at a hotel in Arlington under names that did not belong to either of them. By April, Sylvia had introduced Brandon to a man named Gideon Marsh, a disgraced accountant who had once worked for the SEC before a bribery charge had quietly ended his career and pointed him toward more creative applications of his skills. Gideon had a specific specialty. He knew how to make transfers disappear, how to move assets from one entity to another through a chain of shell companies so intricate and deliberate that untangling it required not just expertise, but a particular kind of patience most investigators simply did not have the time for. What none of them had planned for was the forensic auditor on duty that September. The morning Celeste found out, she had been in a board meeting since 7 a.m. The company's annual audit was standard procedure, handled by a rotating third-party firm. The lead auditor that year was a woman named Frances Okafor, 44, Lagos-born, Princeton-educated, with a reputation in Washington's financial forensics community for being so methodical and so certain in her work that opposing counsel had once described deposing her as like arguing with a wall that has citations. Frances had been brought in by the board chair 18 months earlier, over Brandon's quiet but persistent objection, which Celeste had chalked up to his general discomfort with scrutiny. Frances found the first irregularity on a Monday. She said nothing. She kept working. By Tuesday morning, she had traced it through 4 entities to a Cayman Islands account, registered to a holding company whose beneficial owner, buried under 2 layers of nominee directors, was Brandon Elliott Vaught. She called Celeste into the small conference room at 8:47 a.m. and closed the door. She placed a single printed spreadsheet on the table and folded her hands over it. "Before I show you this," Frances said, "I need to ask you one question. In the last 12 months, did you authorize any transfer from Vaught Analytics to an entity called Meridian Crest Holdings?" Celeste looked at her. "No," she said. Frances slid the spreadsheet across the table. The number was $4.3 million, moved in 11 separate transfers, each under the threshold that would trigger automatic compliance review, each timed on the last business day of a month when Celeste was traveling. The oldest was dated 8 months ago to the week. Celeste sat with the paper in her hands and felt the room go very still. "There's more," Frances said quietly. There was more. Brandon had filed an amendment to their joint estate agreement 6 months earlier, using a notarized document that bore Celeste's signature. She had not signed it. The amendment named him sole inheritor of her privately held company's shares in the event of her death, superseding the trust she had established for the Harmon Family Foundation 3 years prior. The forgery was clean, good enough to pass a standard review, perhaps not good enough to pass Frances Okafor. He also took out a life insurance policy, Frances said, 18 months ago, on your life. The beneficiary is a Sylvia Crane. Celeste set the paper down. She did not cry. She had learned over 17 years of building things in rooms that did not expect her to succeed, that tears were not the correct response to information. Information required a decision. How long have you known? She asked. 72 hours, Frances said. I wanted to be certain before I came to you. I am certain. Celeste looked at the window. Outside, Georgetown was gray and cold and ordinary. Leaves on the sidewalk. A woman walking a dog. The particular unremarkable morning that turns out to be the last one before everything changes. Does he know you found it? No? Good, Celeste said. Then we have time. She did not go home that night. She went to the office of a woman she had known since law school, Harriet Bowe, now one of the 3 or 4 most respected attorneys in federal white-collar criminal defense in the country, which was relevant because Harriet also knew, better than most, how to build an offense. She laid out everything. Harriet listened without expression, asked 11 precise questions, and at the end sat back in her chair and said, "You understand what we're doing here." "I understand exactly what we're doing," Celeste said. Harriet picked up the phone. By the following morning, Frances Okafor was in a room with 2 investigators from the FBI's Financial Crimes Unit, 1 assistant U.S. attorney, and a senior agent from the Treasury Department's Office of Intelligence and Analysis. She laid out her findings across 4 hours. At the end of that meeting, the lead FBI agent, a methodical man named Werner who had worked financial crimes for 19 years and was not easily impressed, looked at his notes and said, "She built this over 8 months while living in the same house as her." "He," Frances corrected. Werner looked up. "The subject is her husband," she said. A brief silence. "Get me everything," Werner said. Celeste went home that night as if nothing had changed. She made dinner. Salmon, roasted asparagus. The kind of weeknight meal that had become automatic over 9 years of marriage. Brandon came home at 7:15. He poured wine. He asked about her day. She said it was fine. She passed him the bread and did not look at his hands and thought, 8 months. You have been doing this for 8 months. She slept on her side of the bed and did not move and listened to him breathe and thought about Frances saying the forgery was clean. Thought about the life insurance policy, thought about Sylvia Crane, whose name she had never heard, who was named as beneficiary on a policy that would pay out $12 million if Celeste Harmon Vaught died. She did not sleep. But she was very, very still. The FBI moved quietly for 6 weeks. They found Gideon Marsh first. He was already being watched for an unrelated matter, and when agents sat across from him in a room in Alexandria, he offered everything within 40 minutes. He gave them Brandon's voice messages. He gave them wire transfer records. He gave them the name of the notary who had fraudulently certified the estate amendment, a man who had, it turned out, performed 7 similar services for 7 different clients over 4 years and was very interested in a cooperation agreement. They found Sylvia Crane's financial records. The insurance policy had been taken out on the same day that Brandon and Sylvia had checked into the Arlington Hotel for the first time. The date was not a coincidence. Nothing about any of this had been coincidental. The case file, when complete, ran to 340 pages. Werner called Harriet Bowe on a Thursday evening. "We're ready," he said. "Arrest can happen whenever." "Not yet," Harriet said. "She wants to do something first." He paused. "What does she want to do?" There was a brief silence, and then Harriet said, "The Vaught Analytics Annual Investor Summit is in 3 weeks." Werner thought about this for a moment. "How many people attend?" he said. About 200, Harriet said. Board members, major investors, partners from 11 countries, 3 senators, 1 former Secretary of State. Another pause. Tell her we'll be there, Werner said. The Vaught Analytics Annual Investor Summit was held every year at the Meridian House in Washington, a Beaux-Arts mansion on Crescent Place that had once been the Polish embassy and now served as the city's most quietly prestigious event venue. Crystal fixtures, dark wood paneling, a terrace that overlooked the city. The kind of room where things were decided rather than announced. Brandon had always attended as her husband. He stood at the edge of conversations and shook hands and accepted credit for proximity. He was good at that, at absorbing reflected importance, as if it were something he had generated himself. This year, he arrived in a charcoal suit and ordered scotch and made his way toward the cluster of board members near the terrace doors. At 8:53 p.m., the main entrance to the Meridian House opened. Celeste Harmon Vaught walked in. She wore a deep burgundy dress, structured at the shoulders, cut for someone who did not need softness to be taken seriously. Her hair was down. She had never worn it down at a company event in 9 years, and people who knew her would later say that detail alone told them something had fundamentally changed. That this was not the woman who had calibrated every visible choice for maximum professional credibility. This was someone who had already won and was only here to collect. She moved through the room unhurried, the way she always moves through rooms, but tonight there was something different underneath it. A clarity, a precision, the particular quality of someone who has had 6 weeks to prepare for a single moment and knows it is about to arrive. She stopped in the center of the room. Across 200 people and 4 decades of Washington's most significant financial relationships, she found Brandon's face. He saw her and smiled, the practiced husbandly smile he had been producing on schedule for 9 years. Then he looked at what she was holding. She was holding nothing, but she was looking at him in a way that she had never once looked at him in 9 years of marriage. And something in the back of his brain, the part that was not charm, not performance, not strategy, understood immediately that the room had changed around him in a way he could not yet measure. Frances Okafor stepped forward from the left side of the room. Harriet Bow from the right, through the doors at the far end, in formal evening wear that would not have been distinguishable to most guests. 11 FBI agents and 4 Treasury investigators had been positioned at tables and along the walls since 7:15 p.m. Werner had been standing near the bar for 90 minutes holding a club soda. Agent Werner stepped into the center of the room and spoke at a register that reached every corner. Ladies and gentlemen, my name is Special Agent Werner, Federal Bureau of Investigation. I apologize for the interruption to your evening. What I'm about to present is a summary of a federal criminal investigation into wire fraud, forgery, conspiracy to commit fraud, and criminal conspiracy, the subject of which is present in this room tonight. Every screen in the Meridian House lit up simultaneously. The AB team had been briefed at 3 p.m. Transfer records. The forged estate amendment. Bank statements for Meridian Crest Holdings. Gideon Marsh's recorded cooperation statement played through the room's sound system in his own voice, calm and specific and devastating. And then the call logs, Brandon's voice. From a hotel room in Arlington 8 months ago to Gideon. She travels so much. Nobody's going to look at it twice. And if something happens to her, when something happens to her, the policy pays out within 30 days. Sylvia gets the cash. I get the company, and nobody in that boardroom is going to question a grieving widower. 200 people heard it. Not one person moved. Brandon's glass made a sound against the table. He turned and looked at the screen. His face went through several expressions very quickly, each one a failed attempt at composure. This is commingulated this. Celeste. Celeste, listen to me. Whatever they've told you. Brandon. Her voice was quiet and absolute. It stopped him the way a door closing stops a room. Don't. She walked toward him through the silent crowd, and people moved for her without thinking. The way people move for someone who has earned the right to this particular walk in this particular room. She stopped 3 feet from him. You forged my signature on documents that would have transferred everything I built to you if I died, she said. You moved $4.3 million out of this company over 8 months. You took out a $12 million life insurance policy on my life and named a woman I have never met as the beneficiary. She looked at him steadily. I want you to know that I know all of it, not because someone told me, because I have spent 6 weeks inside every decision you made, and I understand now exactly what you are. She paused. You are the person I let sit at my table. You are the person I trusted with the things I worked 17 years to build. Her voice did not waver. And I need you to understand that I am standing in front of you, in front of every person in this room, completely intact. You didn't even come close. The handcuffs went on in front of the full board of Vaught Analytics, 6 institutional investors, 3 sitting U.S. senators, 1 former Secretary of State, and a financial press photographer who had been covering the summit for the last 4 years and who had, by fortunate timing, positioned herself near the terrace doors at exactly the right moment. The photograph. Brandon Vaught's face at the precise instant the cuffs closed, Celeste standing 3 feet away, perfectly still, looking at him the way you look at a problem you have already solved, ran in the Financial Times, the Washington Post, and 14 international outlets before midnight. By morning, it was everywhere. The trial took 9 weeks. The federal prosecutor, a meticulous woman named Hargrove who had won 31 of her last 33 cases, presented the evidence with the kind of organized patience that does not leave room for doubt. Gideon Marsh testified for 2 days. The notary testified for 1. The forensic reconstruction of the transfers was presented by Frances Okafor, who walked the jury through 340 pages of documentation with the same unhurried precision she brought to everything, and who at one point, when the defense attorney suggested the transfers might have been clerical errors, looked at him briefly and said, 11 transfers, each within 12% of the reporting threshold, each on the last business day of a month when the account holder was traveling internationally. The probability of that being clerical error is approximately the same as flipping a coin and getting heads 11 times consecutively. The jury took this in. The defense attorney did not follow up. Sylvia Crane was tried separately. She maintained throughout, with a composure that several courtroom observers described as almost pathological, that she had not known the full nature of what Brandon had planned, that she had believed the insurance policy was a private financial arrangement between partners, not a mechanism attached to any plan to harm Celeste. The jury did not find this persuasive. She was convicted on 2 counts of conspiracy and 1 count of wire fraud. Brandon was convicted on 11 counts. The judge, a silver-haired federal appointee named Calloway, who had presided over financial crimes for 26 years and who delivered sentences with the precision of a man who believed language mattered, read the verdict without theatrics. Mr. Vaught, this court finds that you entered a marriage with the deliberate intention of defrauding your spouse, and that over the course of nearly a decade you systematically positioned yourself to benefit from her death. You forged her signature. You stole from the company she built. You paid a disgraced accountant to help you hide it, and you did all of this in a house you shared with her, at a table she set, under a roof she paid for. The judge paused. 17 years. Federal facility. No early release consideration for a period of 8 years. Brandon's composure, which had held through 9 weeks of testimony and 2 weeks of deliberation and the reading of 11 counts of conviction, did not hold through the sentence. He said Celeste's name once, in a voice that had lost all its practiced warmth. She was not in the courtroom. She had watched the verdict delivered on a monitor in Harriet Bowe's office, sitting in one of Harriet's good chairs with a cup of coffee she had been drinking slowly for 40 minutes. And, when the sentence was read, she set the cup down on the table very carefully and looked at the ceiling for a moment and then looked at Harriet and said, "Okay." Harriet smiled. "Okay," she agreed. The divorce had been filed the morning after the arrest and granted in 6 weeks, cleaner than she'd expected, though Harriet had warned her that once the criminal case was underway, the civil proceedings tended to move on a different kind of momentum, She walked out of the attorney's office on a Wednesday morning in January, Washington, cold and bright and sharp-aired. The kind of day that feels like a beginning whether or not you intend it to. Ms. Harmon Vaught. Frances was at the bottom of the steps, coat buttoned to the collar, briefcase at her side, the same contained expression she brought to every room she entered. Celeste stopped. "Divorce final?" Frances asked. "As of 20 minutes ago?" Frances nodded once. Then she said, "I have something for you." She reached into her briefcase and produced an envelope. Inside was a single card, heavy stock, no logo. It said, "The work was the easy part. The rest was yours." F. Celeste read it. Then she looked up at Frances, who was watching her with an expression that was not quite a smile, but that occupied the same territory. "I've been offered a position," Frances said. "Chief Risk and Compliance Officer. The board has been looking since the audit. Celeste had been the one who recommended her to the board 3 weeks ago." "I know," Celeste said. Frances tilted her head slightly. "Did you write the recommendation yourself?" "Every word." A pause. Then Frances said, in the same even tone she used for everything, "I'll take it." They stood for a moment in the January air. Then Celeste said, "I'm having dinner with Harriet and a few of the board members on Friday. You should come." "I will," Frances said. She picked up her briefcase. "I should warn you, I don't do small talk." "I know," Celeste said. "That's why I'm inviting you." Frances Okafor became Chief Risk and Compliance Officer of Vaught Analytics in February. What followed over the next 3 years was the kind of professional partnership that business school case studies are eventually written about. Not because it was warm or dramatic, but because it was exceptionally effective. Frances restructured the company's internal audit process from the ground up. Under her oversight, the firm detected and reported 2 additional instances of external fraud, neither involving anyone inside the company, before the relevant regulatory bodies had identified them. The FBI sent her a commendation letter. She framed it only because Celeste told her it would irritate people in the right way. Vaught Analytics reached a valuation of $9 billion by the end of Celeste's 41st year. She funded a financial literacy initiative in 12 underserved school districts across 4 states. She endowed a forensic accounting fellowship at Howard University and named it, without ceremony or announcement, the Okafor Fellowship. She hired a team of 8 and gave them 3 years and 1 directive: find the Gideon Marshes before they find you. Brandon Vaught served his sentence in a federal facility in Pennsylvania. Celeste did not send photographs. She did not send anything. She had decided in the period between the arrest and the trial that the most complete version of moving forward was the one that did not require his awareness of her happiness in order to feel real. She was right. On a Tuesday evening in March, 3.5 years after the night she sat across from Frances in the small conference room and learned what her husband had done, Celeste Harmon Vaught sat at a dinner table in her Georgetown brownstone with 7 people she trusted completely. Frances was to her left, arguing a point about regulatory disclosure timelines with the kind of calm intensity that had once made a defense attorney visibly reconsider his career. Harriet was across the table, winning the argument on a technicality and looking pleased about it. The board chair was telling a story about a conference in Singapore that had gone comprehensively wrong in a way that was only funny in retrospect. Celeste sat and listened and ate the good food she had made herself and thought, "I almost didn't have this. Someone tried to take this from me, tried to make me into something that could be managed and moved around and eventually removed. She was here anyway." She lifted her glass. Nobody noticed. That was fine. The toast was not for anyone else. To Frances, she thought. To Harriet. To every woman who looked at a problem and didn't look away. She drank. Outside, Washington was cold and lit and full of people making decisions, some of them clean and some of them not. And somewhere in all of that there were men who believed that patience and charm were enough to take what they had not built. They hadn't met Frances Okafor yet. That, Celeste thought, was their problem.